present our work on the Ukraine facility to you and to the Commission. We had a joint committee of the meeting of AFET and Budge, and we saw broad consensus in the vote. That has been the case since the start of the appalling war of aggression that Russia launched on Ukraine. We have a clear political message that has been sent. We are clearly standing shoulder by shoulder with Ukraine, and that's a clear message to our member states and to the aggressor. We will stand by Ukraine during the war, during reconstruction, and as they prepare to join the European Union. Mr. Putin, Ukraine will never return to the gulags. I would like to thank my co-rapporteur, Ida Guardia-Zabal Rubial, representing the Committee on Budgets, and I'd like to thank her for the excellent cooperation and constructive cooperation that facilitated discussions. I'd also like to thank the shadow rapporteurs in the two committees. I'd like to thank them for all their contributions and commitments. We worked under time pressure. We want to get this regulation sealed by the end of the year. We need this debate today and a vote tomorrow, and that wouldn't have been possible without the huge effort deployed by our staff and various teams in the committees and in our MEP offices. The Ukraine facility will help with rebuilding, renewing Ukraine and enabling it to join the European Union. It sets ambitious goals. We will work together with Ukraine on a common European future to allow Ukraine to rebuild its country. It needs to table a Ukraine plan, a master plan. This will be prepared by the government together with regional authorities and civil society. The ultimate say on the plan in Ukraine will go to the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. Extensive rebuilding and modernizing of Ukraine cannot be achieved through public coffers alone. We also need to see grants and investment by the private sector. We need to get that investment to Ukraine sooner than one might expect in war times, and so we want to ensure support for Ukrainian SMEs. Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, €50 billion, that is a huge sum of money, a real show of solidarity from the European Union. We will look at security measures and we will take safeguards to prevent corruption and misuse of funds. We are demanding transparency and scrutiny and have made proposals to ensure those ends. It is encouraging and it makes sense to ensure that civil society organisations in Ukraine are involved. They will carry out monitoring work where state and European structures are overwhelmed. Ukraine already has extensive experience through the partnership principle. Ladies and gentlemen, it is extremely important that Ukraine not just wins the war, but also strengthens democracy at all levels to ensure prosperity for its citizens with the help of the European Union. Slava Ukraina.
Vielen Dank, lieber Kollege Gahler. Next, Eider Gardiazabal Rubial. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues, since the outset of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, we have been mobilizing funds to support politically, economically, and socially Ukraine. And this facility is a priority. That is why it is necessary and urgent for us to approve this new mechanism for $50 billion in grants and loans. Now, the Russian aggression against Ukraine has caused economic damage, multi-million in damage, and when it comes to the public revenues necessary to stand up to this aggression and to maintain the services, we've seen an enormous increase. Now, you would agree then that the Russians would pay for the damages caused to Ukraine. And that is why we are requesting that the Commission establish a legal basis along with other institutions to be able to confiscate the Russian assets for the purposes of reconstruction and to compensate the victims of the aggression. All of that has been confiscated would be then used through this facility that we are discussing, a facility that will include a number of different support programs with a better coherence and consistency. We are giving a predictable instrument to Ukraine to be able to maintain its public services and assist in the rebuilding and modernization of the country. We will also be supporting a reform plan for Ukraine and on its path to the EU. Along with civil society and local authorities, a plan must be established that would then be adopted. This plan, much like the RRF, will have a long and detailed list of reforms and investments with specific milestones and dates. The objective is also to invest in the Ukrainian economy, making sure that it is digital, green, and integrated. Now, this means that people will have dignified living conditions in the country. Critical infrastructure will be established and will be able to make sure that there are good jobs in the future. It is clear that there are major challenges that Ukraine will face to be able to move on its path to EU accession. This facility is a step in that direction. Ukraine, of course, needs to shore up its rule of law and its law enforcement, fighting corruption, and fighting organized crime and oligarchs. It must fight money laundering as well as tax evasion and avoidance, as well as access to information. Rebuilding is a long-term objective. It's extremely ambitious. And at the time, we don't know exactly what it will require. But what we do need to be able to do is count both on the private and the public sector, as well as international institutions, member states, as well as the European Investment Bank. We would like to have a specific pillar that will be set aside for the coordination of all of these players, with strong attention being paid to small and medium-sized corporations. Finally, the facility has another pillar that will mean that we will give technical support to the townships and to civil society, much like what took place during the RRF during the pandemic. What the EU needs to be able to do is not just support Ukraine economically, but do this through a consistent instrument that is flexible and with specific investments in modernization as well as reform in the medium and the long term. So now here we are, and we hope that we will be able to negotiate with Council as quickly as possible so that this will take force in 2024. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gardiazabal Rubial, and we continue with the Commission with Commissioner Johannes Hahn.
Herr Vorsitzender, this House for the sense of importance and urgency that it has shown in finding swiftly a position on the Ukraine facility. The Union has been consistent in its support to Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's war of aggression. So far, together with our member states, we have provided more than €80 billion through humanitarian aid, economic and military assistance, as well as support for Ukrainians who have sought refuge in the Union. The EU is committed to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is why, as part of the revision of the EU's multi-annual financial framework, we have proposed a new €50 billion Ukraine facility aimed at ensuring predictable medium-term support for the country's recovery and reconstruction. The facility will be closely tied to key reforms that Ukraine needs to implement on its EU accession track. Support under the facility will be based on Ukraine's fulfilment of conditions. The facility has been designed to enable the Union to provide different forms of support to Ukraine while ensuring the necessary flexibility to respond to the circumstances on the ground as they might evolve. The government of Ukraine will need to prepare a plan for recovery, reconstruction and modernisation, detailing the reforms and investments it intends to undertake, which are also needed as part of its EU accession process. To ensure predictability of funding, support under the facility will be provided in line with the progress Ukraine will make in delivering on this plan. We are already working with Ukraine to facilitate preparing the plan. It's important that the support from key donors to Ukraine remains well coordinated and coherent. Only so can it be used to the maximum. Since January this year, we are engaging with key donors through the G7 multi-agency donor coordination platform. We are encouraging other donors to use the future plan as a reference point in providing their assistance. Our proposed Ukraine facility also includes a robust framework for transparency, audit and control to ensure the protection of EU financial interests. A dedicated audit board consisting of independent members appointed by the Commission will assist the Commission by reporting on the possible mismanagement of the funds spent to achieve the objective of the facility and by making recommendations to Ukraine. Honourable Members, the war continues and Ukraine needs support in the form of fresh funding, support that will not risk adding to the country's debt burden, support to get its economy on track so that in the longer run it will be less dependent on donors and can increasingly stand on its own feet, support to crowd in private investment, and support to keep Ukraine firmly on its accession track with consistent progress on reforms. The Commission is grateful to the European Parliament and in particular to the two co-rapporteurs for the speed with which they have advanced on the draft report that will be voted, I understand, tomorrow. It's crucial to reach an agreement before the end of this year to ensure that Ukraine can continue to receive our support already at the beginning of next year. So we hope that the Council will also proceed swiftly so that trilogues could start as soon as possible. The Commission will continue to play its role to ensure that the next steps of the negotiations deliver a balanced and ambitious instrument that can signal the Union's steadfast support for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. And we continue with Mr. Petri Sarvamaa, please.
Thank you, Chair, Honourable Commissioner, dear colleagues. Almost 600 days ago, Russia launched a brutal and murderous attack against the sovereign state of Ukraine. Since the very first day of this cold-hearted attack, the European Union has stood by the side of Ukraine, providing 30 billion euros from the EU budget in support so far. The Ukraine facility will continue this support. It will ensure continuity and predictability of the support for the next 3 years. 50 billion euros is a reasonable start for rebuilding Ukraine, but we all know that we will need more in the future. The economic costs of the Russian attack are already now around 270 billion euros, and the process of rebuilding Ukraine has been estimated to cost around 384 billion euros. And in addition, the psychological toll on the Ukraine people will be immeasurable. It is of high importance that the facility paves the way for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union. Endorsing the rule of law as well as other fundamental European values will create a steady foundation for a stronger Ukraine. It will finally allow for Ukraine's complete separation from the Russian influence. When implementing the Ukraine facility, the European Union and Ukraine must ensure that the funds end up with correct beneficiaries. There must be zero tolerance for misuse of EU funds. This is of high importance in order to maintain the legitimacy of the Ukraine support in the eyes of EU citizens. But as long as this principle is respected, Ukraine can rest assured that the European Union stands by its side as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarvamaa, and we continue with Mr. Włodzimierz Cimochewicz, please.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie
President, Commissioner, long-term aid for Ukraine is of absolute importance. I think that the proposal of the European Commission is a good starting point. We have enriched the starting point through debates in the European Parliament, and I hope our position will be welcomed by other EU institutions. We want to support day-to-day budget needs, recovery, reconstruction of Ukraine. We are going to earmark for this quite a lot of money, but we have to realize that the current budget gaps in Ukraine are huge, and that's why most of the money will probably end up there. Soon Ukraine will not be able to draw any more loans with international institutions. That means that financing of rebuilding will just be illusionary in this context. We really have to define what we need to do first, and that would be confiscating the frozen Russian assets. Saying that we can't do this legally is not true. At the moment, we have no immunities to deal with. The Parliament has already put this forward as a proposal, and I definitely recommend this solution to the Council. The crimes, the war crimes that happened justified that. I understand that some heads of state are against due to some legal expertises that maybe are not fully justified, or maybe for business reasons. But I would like to remind you that Russia has already gained tens of millions of euros through various business deals with Europe. So let's not give up on this.
Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, please.
Gerbiamas posėdžio pirmininkė, komisijos nariai.
Chairman, Commissioner, Ukrainians, colleagues. Today, we are commemorating 600 days since the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Since the infrastructure has been damaged, civilians have been killed, and various war atrocities have been carried out. The Russian war against Ukraine and its price is very huge. So we will need decades to rebuild the country and its economy. The EU's decision to draw a long-term plan for 24-27 and to have this 50 billion facility is a very useful step. I think it shows our solidarity towards Ukraine, and it is a very concrete and real action that we can show. I think it is important to us all that this Ukrainian facility could help modernize the economy of the country, would also increase the effectiveness of economy, and would also help increase the income of its citizens. I would also like to say that Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine must also show its responsibility in uptaking this support. We must also include social partners in the process. The Ukraine facility is a really great example of the partnership, of a way forward. Restoring the Ukrainian economic potential can be the best symbol of Russian loss. Thank you.
Mr. Auštrevičius, and wir machen jetzt weiter mit der Kollegin Viola
von Kraumen-Taubel. Go ahead.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar.
President, Commissioner, honourable members, as someone rightly said, Russia is a petrol station pretending to be a supermarket. We were fooled by the myth of Russia as a military power. For 600 days now, Ukrainians have defended their country against Putin's war. It has defended its access to the sea to allow wheat to be and grain to be exported. Ukraine is defending its own freedom, of course, but also our freedom in the European Union. And every cent we invest in Ukraine is money that we invest in democracy and our security. The new Ukraine facility, €50 billion, will help Ukrainians to survive and to rebuild their country, a country that can become better and greener, an example for all others. We are guaranteeing a future for Ukrainians decided by their people, their parliament, their civil society, their local authorities. They will decide what the Ukraine of the future will look like. European taxpayers, however, need to know how their monies are being spent, and so we have ensured that there will be comprehensive transparency attached to the Ukraine facility. We can ensure, therefore, that every cent that is invested in the country will be accounted for. This is to help Ukraine join the European Union. There is a real example here of rebuilding, recovery and reform. We will see a more democratic Ukraine, a green engine powering the future of Europe. Thank you, and my thanks to both rapporteurs for the excellent cooperation.
Weiter mit dem Kollegen Bogdan.
Thank you very much. We'll continue with Mr. Bogdan Zronsha.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący, panie komisarzu. Mieszkam niedaleko.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, I live quite closely to the border with the Ukraine, so I'm very much aware of what is going on. And yes, we do support every possible action that is supposed to help Ukraine. And yes, the place of Ukraine is in the EU. This is quite evident. However, we don't want to multiply all kinds of requirements that have to be met by the Ukraine, for example, in terms of the greening of the requirements. What these people need is a job, good labor market, just conditions to survive and prosper. The time for fighting corruption will come. Of course, the Ukraine, if it wants to join the EU, will have to face the problem of corruption. The money that we are offering them now is a lot. It's 50 billion euro. Yes, that's true. We are talking about both grants and subsidies. I'm sure we will. If we offer them loans, they will not be able to pay them back. So this will have to be grants. That is why my group wants to, first of all, analyze profoundly what the real needs are and do a stock taking of what we have already provided for and where it ended up. It is very difficult for the Ukraine to sustain this pace of progress. They are still fighting. They are fighting for our freedom as well, and we have to support them. I would also like to appeal to you to not pay attention to fake news. For example, in Poland, we had election yesterday, and Mr. Weber said here in this room that Donald Tusk won the election. That is not true. This is fake news. The Civic Platform only got 28%. It's the Law and Justice Party that got, for the time being, 38% and counting. So if Mr. Weber knows his algebra, should do well to check it up.
Yanni.
We'll begin with, we'll continue with Mr. Mariani. Thank you. 70 billion euros is what you are requesting between 2024 and 2027 for Ukraine. 70 billion in addition to the 72 billion that have already been earmarked by the EU since 2022, Commissioner. Now, I'm not even talking about the 400 billion that are being requested for future rebuilding. That is a lot of money. Our fellow citizens will be looking at us because of the increase in interest rates and inflation. And these funds will be given without any a sort of counterpart as was stated on the 5th of October by the Court of Auditors. If we look at the budget, about 10% in 2023 because of inflation will these funds will be increased, and that will actually weaken any future European budgets. Now, these funds are being given to a corrupt political class all the way up to the top, even to the president, and that is precisely what we are trying to do for Ukraine. Nothing more, nothing less.
Merci beaucoup. And we can...
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mick Wallace, please. The floor is yours. Yep.
Commissioner. The 50 billion Ukraine facility is a rushed, inadequate mechanism tailor-made for corruption and embezzlement of EU funds on a massive scale. There are simply not enough measures in the proposal to mitigate the threats posed by the rampant high-level corruption in Ukraine. Ukraine is, to quote Jean-Claude Juncker, corrupt at all levels of society. Read any European Court of Auditors report on Ukraine and find similar conclusions. They document a complete lack of value for money in terms of reforms. Any progress achieved with EU funds is constantly under threat. In their opinion on the facility, they say the proposal fails to demonstrate how the risks will be mitigated. Oligarchs and vested interests across Ukraine are the root cause of corruption and obstacle to economic development in the country. The facility has no provision to exclude companies under oligarch influence from receiving support. We are constructing a colonial debt trap for Ukraine, facilitating more destruction as we continue to fuel the war, and further theft of lands and assets by Western capital. I'm in favour of helping Ukraine, but you're not going to help them with more debt. 2/3 of the money is debt. You're going to kill them with debt. How are they going to pay it back? They won't pay it back in the next 50 years. But what it will mean is that we're colonising the place. It's bad enough we have Western companies now that have bought up more land at a fire sale price than the Russians have taken on the east side. What's wrong with us? We're going to take their land and we're going to take their workers for cheap labour for Western European countries. We're going to pauperise the place. We're creating a bleak future for the people of Ukraine.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Fabio Massimo Castaldo. Please, the floor is yours.
Grazie, caro Presidente.
Thank you. Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. Firstly, I'd like to thank the rapporteurs for the great work that they've done. And tomorrow, once again, we will confirm our support to the people of Ukraine. Today, we've got an important mission in Kyiv. I've been there myself, and I saw what's happened in the last few months and the terrible damage that has been dealt out for Ukraine. They're fighting for their freedom, and reconstruction is going to be incredibly difficult, but it is nonetheless a moral imperative. We have to ensure that we are not ambiguous here and that we do not operate under dual standards. We have to face up to the reality of this situation. We also have to place the blame where it's due with the regime of Vladimir Putin. We have to stand up to our commitments. We need to ensure that with this instrument we are confirming democracy and the rule of law. Ukraine will never be a brutalized part of the Russian imperialist regime. Slava Ukraina.
Castaldo, and we continue with Ms. Sandra Kalniete, please.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the place of Ukraine is in Europe. The courageous Ukrainians have demonstrated this for the second year already. They have paid their lives. It's a very high price. Therefore, we have to make this decision today, the decision on accession, and we should start the procedure next year so that Ukraine can become in the next decade a member of the EU. We support this Ukrainian facility in the amount of 50 billion for the time period from 24 to 27. This is meant for support to reconstruction, renovation and implementation of the reforms necessary to join the EU. We should come to the agreement on this mechanism as soon as possible in order to approve it together with the budget for the next year. Therefore, we should amend the multi-annual framework from 21-27, and we need unanimous voting in the Council for that. It is very important to show support and to continue showing support to Ukraine starting from the next year. In this instrument, we should not include the repayment of credits, and we should also not take into account the foreign assets that will become available when Russia assets are seized. This mechanism should be flexible. It should allow taking very rapid and needed decisions, and it should be very, absolutely transparent.
Here is our colleague Margarida Marques, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Since the outset of the war, the European Parliament has defended and voted in favor of financial support for Ukraine. Now, we again support the European Commission's proposal for a medium and long-term financing solution to continue to support Ukraine. Now, this is a solution that is within the union budget. It is based not just on loans, but also on grants. Now, this is a solution that means that we need a review of multi-financial framework revision. It is necessary and urgent. This solution is capable of leveraging other international donors and mobilizing more support for Ukraine in a world experiencing increasing conflict on the global scale. It is necessary to do this, to continue financing Ukraine, because on the 31st of December, financing to Ukraine will cease, but also to mitigate the impact of the war on the lives of Europeans, and to create budgetary space for new challenges that aren't actually new challenges, as they are old challenges that have become urgent yet again in this current global geopolitical context.
Georgie, please.
For some time now, I've been hearing in Brussels and Strasbourg that the European Union has grown tired of helping Ukraine. Luckily, the Ukrainians are not tired of fighting. Luckily, the Ukrainians are not tired of dying at our borders. Luckily, they are not tired of stopping Russia's missiles before they reach Romania, Poland or Estonia. Luckily, the Romanians are not tired of taking shelter night after night from the Russian drones that cross the borders. Luckily, the European citizens are not tired of helping mothers and children fleeing with only their clothes on from the rape, torture and death spread by Putin. How can we become tired when others are fighting and dying? But yes, indeed, something must change. We must start to truly respect European citizens. We must not allow ourselves to continue to spend European money for Ukraine when the hundreds of billions of euros of the oligarchs and of the Kremlin regime are just lying there. We can no longer protect Putin's accomplices' fortunes. We can no longer finance the business partners of Putin in Europe, whether they are European companies or not. We can no longer encourage Putin's friends' blackmail in the European Union. We can no longer tolerate the avoidance of sanctions and exemptions from exemptions. 60 days of wars have passed. For the peace and prosperity of the European citizens, we have a duty to support Ukraine's fight and its reconstruction, but using the money of its attackers, using the money of those responsible for the destruction of whole cities, using the money of those polluting our air, water and soil, using the money of those burning the grains in order to raise our prices, using the money of those that thought they would bring Europe to its knees with propaganda and gas, from the money of Vladimir Putin and its oligarchs. Take their money.
Nächster Redner ist Herr Damian.
The next speaker is Mr. Damian Böselager.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, colleagues. The Ukraine facility is a sign of historic support for Ukraine, and I'm proud to be part of the negotiation team. It's historic because we sent two strong messages. The first one is that our commitment to Ukraine is long and long term. The Ukraine facility is an institutional design for a long-term tool. That is why it's so important not only how much we spend, but also how we spend the money. And I'm happy that some of our ideas were taken up here, especially when it comes to defining a minimum share for SMEs, because we do need Ukraine to build new businesses, introduce innovations, and push forward the green transition instead of just pouring helicopter money on state-owned enterprises. And the second important message, and I think that's also key to underline, is good institutions matter. We've learned from the Marshall Fund that good governance, checks and balances, and transparency matter, especially in a country that hopefully sooner rather than later will join the EU. We have therefore strengthened institutions such as the Rada, Verhofna. We have involved local actors, civil society, and we ask for a list of final beneficiaries to be able to follow the money. Colleagues, I also want to say that reconstruction will need many additional funds. Let's face it, 50 billion over 4 years will not be sufficient to support Ukraine until the end of the war and for the reconstruction. But we started by setting this program up long term, and I'm happy that we do that, because in the end, I mean, some colleagues and I, we went to Ukraine recently. What Ukrainians are enduring for democracy is really hard, and I think giving some support here is the least we can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Böselager. Next speaker is Mr. Johan van Overtveld, please.
President, Commissioner, honourable members, since February 2022, Ukraine has been fighting a war against an evil power that represents a threat in every sense for our Western values. There can be no doubt that Ukraine deserves our full support in this fight against barbaric oppression in defence of freedom. Our commitment initially came in the shape of support for the army. It became clear at that point that we in the European Union need to thoroughly overhaul and future-proof defence spending. We also showed our responsibility towards Ukrainian society. The EU would like to play an important role in the recovery, reconstruction and modernisation of Ukraine by supporting investment, the investment that the country needs to rebuild. Our commitment is clear, but we should not ignore the fact that unfortunately, in Ukraine, there is still a risk of corruption. We need to ensure sufficient audit and checks, such as an audit board. I would call for transparency and proper democratic scrutiny through this Parliament. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. van Overtveld, and wir machen weiter mit dem.
And we'll continue with Roman Haider.
Die Politik der EU.
The EU's policy on politics on Ukraine has fallen short. They're not effective and they're counterproductive even. Everything seems to be stagnating, if not completely failing here. And when politics fails us, we need to have a rethink. But in the EU, it seems that the opposite is happening. We're instead pouring a further 50 billion euro into Ukraine, into an incredibly corrupt country. And Ukraine is corrupt across the board. That's something that Jean-Claude Juncker said himself, across the board at all levels. And Ukraine has got so many corruption scandals. It is throughout all of its organisations and in all of its ministries. The European Court of Auditors said that sending money to places that are corrupt simply will not help. And now we're talking about sending 50 billion euro further over there with no real controls. 50 billion euro, which is going to be available to corrupt politicians. And really, I have to ask, what is going on at the Commission now? Here, this is people who you want to send 50 billion euros to a country which is entirely corrupt. That's not going to help anyone.
Yes. Wir haben Herr Haider, wir haben eine blaue.
Mr. Haider, we've got a blue card.
Wir haben von wem? Ja, Miss Schroedrova, Michaela, please. Kollege Haider. Okay, this is noted as. Yeah. We continue now. We continue then with Vice President Papadimoulis Dimitrios, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ukraine needs to be rebuilt, and they also need our solidarity. And with this report, the European Parliament not only supports but also improves upon the Commission's proposal. A proposal that will give this country 50 billion euros in loans and guarantees. But in order to be able to rebuild Ukraine, the first thing we need is for the war to stop. Putin's invasion has to stop, otherwise we cannot rebuild. And there is the point where the Commission, the European Union has to do more, because it's been 2 years since the invasion, and while the war is going on, we cannot have any kind of rebuilding. And we need to fight corruption. There's this orgy of corruption taking place in the Ukraine right now, and unless we do something about it, we do something with deeds, not words, then that money is going to disappear in a black hole, and it will go into the pockets of the oligarchs and not the Ukrainian people. So we need transparency as to where this money is going. And this is where the European Parliament wants certain checks and balances, and we hope that the Council, with the help of the Commission, will accept those proposals.
Manuel Fernandes, please.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, Commissioner, it is our obligation to defend liberty, the rule of law, democracy, freedom, life and human dignity, and that is why we support Ukraine. This is precisely why we must continue to support these values and support Ukraine. By doing that, we are defending the citizens of the EU. It is urgent for the Council to decide to review at the MFF such that we can make this support possible, because we know that the programming ends this year. The current budget doesn't have a margin. It has no flexibility to be able to continue to offer this support. In the negotiations for the MFF, we stated the fact that the budget wasn't enough, that there wasn't enough flexibility, and that we wanted to be able to be up to the challenge of what is happening today, but to what might take place in the future, to unforeseen or unpredictable events. Therefore, we need a revision of that budget. We are looking at, through this facility, of grants and loans, but we have to keep in mind that the costs of this support is going to be much higher, and that is why we need this revision. I would like to call, therefore, on the Council to act, and to act urgently, such that they adopt the MFF for the purposes of this objective. This is an obligation that we have, obligation that is to continue to support Ukraine. Thank you.
Continue with Mr. Thijs-Ruijten, please.
Dear President, Commissioner, colleagues, with everything we did so far in support of Ukraine, there was always one certainty: we need to do more. But this is a great proposal. It structures and reinforces our support to Ukraine, and it will serve as a blueprint for follow-up schemes. The impact of this support for the reforms and the restructuring undertaken while fighting the Russian aggression can't be underestimated. Precisely because there is still a lot to do, we will help Ukraine until victory, until ready to join the EU. But as I said, we need to do more. And this facility would be even more meaningful if we would stop incrementalism and deliver more weapons faster, send the ATACMS, speed up pilots training and send the jets, bring on the 12th sanction package, including diamonds and Russian LNG, and enforce the sanctions. Ukraine must win as fast as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruijten, and we continue with our colleague, Ms. Hilde Woutmans, please.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, honourable members. Victor Hugo once said that the dark night will end at some point and the sun will rise. Now, Ukrainians are experiencing a dark night, but it will end. And we are showing here that we will offer our support to Ukraine to rebuild its country. We've guaranteed that support through to 2027. Of course, we need to scrutinise that support. We need to look at harnessing any frozen Russian assets in Europe. To this end, our Prime Minister in Belgium last week took a first step in that direction. Europe needs to take a leaf out of Mr. Tukhru's book. We want Ukraine to win the war. It needs military support. We need to keep up the pressure on Putin. We cannot imagine what would happen if Putin were to win this war. Colleagues, we've taken a step in the right direction, but we need to do more. We need to flesh out the defence union. We need to ensure a real European defence industry and supply weapons, and then we can put an end to the dark night. Thank you. Thank you. Bernard Simniok is our next speaker.
Herr Präsident.
President, the current situation in Ukraine provides significant options for people such as BlackRock. Now, the aim of an investment society is the same as it is for the people. BlackRock, however, it seems, want to profit from the situation in Ukraine through privatization and less options for trade unions. The current legal situation is going to open up windows for people who want to take advantage of it. Ukraine, it seems, is at risk of being for sale. And so we must act cautiously. We need to ensure that the land is not fertile for such actions. The European taxpayers, with this €50 billion, are now to take on responsibility for the Ukrainian citizens. It seems like the Ukrainian elite and no one else is going to be the winner here. We have to look at what hides behind this war, and we don't want to end up the prey of this war. Instead, we need to try to support Ukrainian citizens.
Here with our colleague, Mr. Andrius Kubilius, please.
Dear colleagues, today we are discussing one of the most important European Union geopolitical initiatives. I can just congratulate the Commission on the proposal to establish Ukraine facility and to allocate €50 billion for the period of 2024-2027. But as the Commission put into explanatory note, there will be a need of €384 billion during the next 10 years. That is why facility with a €50 billion is just the beginning. We need to see from where and when additional financial resources will come, and it's time to make a bold decision on countermeasures and to confiscate all the €300 billion of frozen Russian assets. In addition, we need to be very clear with the establishment of needed institutional architecture for the whole, almost €500 billion reconstruction plan. From my point of view, because of geopolitical significance of the whole reconstruction, there is a need for a special dedicated EU agency, like it was done with the EU Agency for Reconstruction of Western Balkans. Also, there is a need of special high-level EU envoy for reconstruction, like Americans did with the appointment of Secretary Pritzker for such a task. I see also a need of more clear IPA 3 type framework in the facility, since it is declared that this facility also will replace IPA instrument. Now, we need to approve €50 billion instrument, but looking into the future, we need more money and more effective institutional arrangement on the EU side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubilius. Next speaker is Mr. Eero Heinäluoma, please.
Arvoisa puhemies, Ukrainan kansan kärsimykset ovat...
Thank you very much. The suffering of the Ukrainian people is something that is impossible to understand in Europe of the 21st century. Russia militarily invades the country. Therefore, we have to provide all support, financial support, to aid Ukraine to reestablish the sovereignty of this country and to make sure that there is peace and reconstruction of the country. When it comes to this facility, to the tune of 50 billion, the European Parliament should support it wholeheartedly. Moreover, we should state extremely clearly that Russia should offer economic support for all of the destruction that it has wreaked. Now, we need to continue to support the Ukrainians, and we shouldn't accept any corruption. Therefore, we need to support, continue to show that we will stand with Ukraine.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, honourable members. With all eyes legitimately focused on the Middle East, Vladimir Putin is rubbing his hands in glee, stepping up attacks and continuing to commit heinous crimes. We have earmarked 50 billion for Ukraine, and it is urgently needed, coming at a time when the US is no longer able to offer funding guarantees. It is also a healthy reminder. It demonstrates whose side we're on, the side of democracy, of powerful values, peace, freedom, rule of law, pluralism. In short, everything that Vladimir Putin and some of his fans on the far right and far left have scorned through their past votes in this chamber. This European aid will not only offer long-term support to help Ukrainians rebuild their country, ensure working hospitals and schools, it will ensure that the schools can continue to educate children that have been traumatized by bombardments. It is also European aid to protect 40 million facing belligerent nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Lucas Mandel.
Danke, sehr geehrter.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. The European Commission is having to deal with a lot of criticism in recent times. Citizens who are turning to their European Parliament and demanding a lot, and that's quite right. But the Ukraine facility, the reconstruction plan for Ukraine, is something for which the Commission should get a lot of praise. What's being done here is so important that we need to take action now and prepare now for the reconstruction of Ukraine. 50 billion is going to be handed over, and that is going to be good for all of us in Europe, for us as well as Ukraine. It's important that we are giving the grants and loans, but it's also important that we've got the investment programs that are going to be set up with the private sector and third parties, the so-called technical aid, which is also such great support for a psychological reconstruction as well, to help the victims of war and those traumatized by the war. This is something which has to be successful in Ukraine. The population is going to be traumatized. It's going to be incredibly important to help them get their infrastructure back on its feet. A lot of companies, European companies, Austrian companies, are working together with Ukraine and for Ukrainian citizens, and I'm absolutely delighted that all of this is also being done under the leadership of an Austrian commissioner, Mr. Hahn.
And we continue with Vice President Pina Picierno, please.
Grazie. Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. For a year and a half now, Ukrainian citizens have forgotten what it means, normality, what a daily life is like. because the Russian terrorist attacks have a huge cost for the citizens. Bombs, mines, landmines, all of this is destroying schools, roads, hospitals, and it means that people do not have access to basic services, and it denies them the ability to look to the future with faith. Therefore, we need to assist Ukraine to stand up again, to work together for a world, a future based in trust. This facility should be for solid reforms, for a European future for Kiev, to give long-lasting support to Ukraine, even using Russian confiscated assets, because there will not be any peace without justice. A free and solid and democratic Ukraine also means that we need to, that will mean that Europe will be a prosperous and stable place.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Dear colleagues, Russian aggression against Ukraine has lasted not for 2, but already 10 years. The full-scale attack began 600 days ago. Defenders of Ukraine have heroically confronted a Russian war machine. By defending its homeland, the Ukrainian people defend our values, our way of life that Russia is trying to demolish. Countless Ukrainian lives have been lost in this war. The EU and West can help Ukraine and its people to defend their home. We must continue providing military support. There is no space for war fatigue. It is important to help Ukraine with reconstruction and reform efforts. It's absolutely vital that we endorse the Ukraine facility package fast. The Ukraine facility must become the modern-day Marshall Plan for Ukraine. It should help Ukraine to utilize the economic potential. Ukraine is a land of opportunities with an immense industrial and agricultural potential. International community must pursue the possibility to use the frozen funds of Putin Russia for Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. It's obvious that Ukraine facilities 50 billion is not enough, but it is a good start. Good to start a large-scale reconstruction and reform process. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teras, and we continue with Mr. Marek Belka, please.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, the creation of the Ukraine facility is a strong commitment from the EU, which shows that we will not abandon Ukraine and will work towards its victory and EU integration. The €50 billion package has to support the Build Back Better principle and a set of strategic projects to create a green, sustainable and just Ukrainian economy. Massive public and private funding will be needed to restore critical infrastructure, housing and repair damages. However, the aggressor has to pay. We need to use Russia's frozen assets to cover inflicted damages. The reconstruction has to be connected to EU accession. Our Ukrainian friends have to work hard to implement necessary reforms. When this happens, we shall all meet in the EU as partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belka. Next speaker is Madam Michaela Šojdrová, please.
Thank you. Děkuji, vážený pane předsedající, pane
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Ukraine has been defending itself for 600 days against massive Russian aggression, and we know that without assistance from the EU and other allies, this would not have been possible, which is why we need to continue to provide military assistance, weapons, but also we need to help with the reconstruction of the infrastructure, which is why I welcome this Ukraine facility. And I also welcome the fact that it calls for a plan to distribute this assistance in cooperation with the Ukrainian government. And I also think it's correct that it should be under democratic control of the Verkhovna Rada that should monitor that the assistance goes where it's needed. I also welcome the decision of the competent committee in the sense that the assistance should go also for hospitals, culture establishments, educational centers, and also centers for children without parents or children that need foster care. What is also important is that Russia bears responsibility and also the costs of this reconstruction, and therefore we need to use the confiscated assets of the Russian regime, and they need to be used in this sense.
The next speaker is Ms. Carina Olsson, please.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you. This unprovoked and illegal war of aggression on the part of Russia has brought with this appalling suffering for the Ukrainian people. It is vital that we continue to support the Ukrainian people in their fight against Russian aggression. We need to continue pressure on Russia to put an end to this unjustified war. A report has been published on sexual abuse of Ukrainian women and girls, abuse carried out by Russian soldiers. We also need to consider what will happen when those soldiers return home. We know that violence triggers further violence, often as a result of patriarchal structures. It is vital that in the Ukraine facility we factor in gender equality. That must be reflected in any future plan adopted by Ukraine. We must ensure gender equality, strengthen women's rights, girls' rights. The future of Ukraine is in the European Union, and that needs to be a future that represents equality. Thank you.
The floor, and I invite Ms. Claire Daly to speak, please.
Thanks very much, President. There's no doubt about it. Reconstruction of Ukraine must be dealt with. And the European Union, which hasn't lifted a finger to work for peace, but has done everything to keep the war going, certainly has a role in that. But I think the question is how and why. And if you read the European Court of Auditors' report on this, in accountants' language, it's the equivalent of them jumping up and down, screaming blue murder, that this plan isn't thought out. It's an opportunity for massive enrichment of a tiny minority of both Ukrainian oligarchs and transnational financial corporations in a country infamous for corruption. If you think about it, on the one hand, we're giving 50 billion to Ukraine in reconstruction, in loans which will never be repaid but will hang over the population, at the same time as we're putting 20 billion to keep the destruction going in arms. It'd make you think, is this some sort of a scam? And then you see the 8 billion in insurance to guarantee the investors. Now, we had something like this in Ireland years ago when Irish citizens bailed out German bondholders in vicious austerity. Now it looks like the Ukrainian and European citizens will be bailing out bondholders. It's an absolute joke.
I invite Commissioner Hahn to take the floor.
I had another thing at the end.
I have to say, listening to the last speaker, I think it's important to recall that we are talking about a war of aggression of Russia, of Putin's Russia against Ukraine. And I think it's obvious that we as Europeans have to support the Ukrainians in order to regain their territorial integrity, to help citizens in Ukraine to survive. And that's why I'm grateful for the interventions today, for the majority, huge majority of interventions today, which have sent a strong message to Ukraine and our international partners about our commitment to the recovery and reconstruction of the country and for placing Ukraine firmly on the path of European accession. And may I say, I'm in particular in these days where, of course, for very understandable reasons, our focus is on the Middle East, but we should not forget what's going on in Ukraine, and therefore the people there need our strong support in terms of moral support, but also, of course, financial support. And that's why we have to show
the same dedication and urgency for Ukraine also in the future. And thank you. We can count on both, I have to say here, the European Parliament and the Council to advance quickly on their discussions so that money can continue to be provided to Ukraine next year as well. And may I recall, because I have heard today several times talking about 50 billions which are quasi transferred to Ukraine. These 50 billions are for the next 4 years, and they are split in a compartment of 33 billions for a macro-financial assistance and 70 billions for grants, part of it to serve the interests stemming from the macro-financial assistance, but also anticipating future reconstruction efforts and therefore to provide, if necessary, and this is hopefully soon the case, provisions and guarantees for financial institutions to provide the necessary financial means in order to support Ukraine's reconstructions as fast as possible. I think this instrument, which we are discussing today, is placing the Union at the forefront of all the international efforts for the reconstruction and recovery of the country and sending a strong signal about ambitious and commitment. And I think this is equally important looking at the situation in the United States, where it is not so sure if they can continue supporting Ukraine, at least in the way they did it so far. And finally, nevertheless, I have to recall that what we are talking today is part and parcel of our MFF midterm review. So we have to see the entirety of the review, but of course the support for Ukraine is the centerpiece of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hahn. We come back to the rapporteurs, and I invite Michael Gahler to take the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, to the large majority of speakers here, thank you for reconfirming our broad consensus. I need not go into any further details in this regard, but I would like to say to those who are closest to Putin in this House, they really have no right to claim that there is corruption in Ukraine. Who is the godfather of corruption, of kleptocratic structures? That is Putin, who wants with his allies to regain control of this country. And rest assured that this facility, among other things, will see to it that there is a control of the finances. There is already anti-corruption control working in Ukraine. NABU, ZAPO, the Prozoro system for public procurement. And there is the political will of the real reformers, and there is the vigilance of the civil society in Ukraine that we are also including and strengthening here. And insofar, I think this will be one of the most controlled financial transactions that we have ever seen. And there was the other argument to say we want to colonize with our entrepreneurs Ukraine. Well, the only one who wants to colonize Ukraine is Putin. He is the slaveholder of his own country and wants to establish his, well, even the Stalinist or fascist regime back in Ukraine. He will not succeed. But I can say something. Our investment in this country make this country also safer. That has been the case in the after-war West Germany, where there were some arguments, well, there are so many Americans and Westerners coming and buying things. First of all, nothing was taken away. The same will be the case in Ukraine. Nobody takes anything away. But there will be a higher interest in this country that it stays safe and on the side of freedom and democracy. And insofar, I welcome all bigger and smaller investors in Ukraine to contribute their share for the reconstruction of the country. I think that will be a good investment because this country will at the end be an asset to the European Union. Once again, Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, and we will conclude with Ms. Eider Gardiazabal Rubial, please.
Thank you, President. Looking at the content of the Ukraine facility, I think we've said everything we need to say. It is a good proposal from the Commission, and we in the political groups have worked hard to significantly improve the facility. I would like to use the minute that I have left to thank in particular my co-rapporteur, Mr. Gahler, for the excellent cooperation, for his availability, his commitment to ensuring that we strike an agreement Without that commitment and work, this proposal would not have been agreed. We also appreciated the work of all the shadows. It's true that there are nuances. I don't think we have significant differences of opinion, but we have different points of view, and we managed to resolve our differences. All political groups showed great goodwill to work swiftly and to resolve any issues, and we've managed to come forward with this Parliament proposal, a plan to support Ukraine, that the Ukrainian government, its local authorities and civil society, it will be fully fledged participant. Both regions, municipalities will be involved, so we have clear commitments. We have strict checks and balances in place. We really emphasise the importance of scrutiny, and I hope that we will receive broad-based support in this chamber. It's very important that we move swiftly on to negotiations with Council so that this plan and this regulation can enter into force on the 1st of January 2024 so that we can help Ukrainians, and they need our full support. Thank you very much.
The debate is now closed and the vote will be held tomorrow. The next item on the agenda is the report by Mr. Fernandes and Mr. Ehler